Raseiniai, Lithuania, June 24, 1941, 6 a.m. For 2 days, Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union had looked unstoppable. German Panzer divisions tore through Lithuania at breathtaking speed. Town after town fell. Supply convoys packed with fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements raced east to keep the offensive moving. Then, everything stopped. Not because of artillery, not because of Soviet aircraft, not because of a minefield. The first reports reaching German headquarters sounded too absurd to believe. A single Soviet tank had blocked the only road forward. One tank. No infantry, no artillery, no defensive line, just a silent armored giant sitting in the middle of a narrow road. At first, German commanders assumed it had been abandoned. Its engine wasn't running. There was no movement, no gunfire. Nothing suggested anyone was still inside. Then, the first convoy rolled closer. The tank's turret slowly turned. Seconds later, the road erupted into chaos. The lead fuel truck exploded. The last truck in the column burst into flames. Within minutes, 12 supply vehicles were destroyed or abandoned, trapping the entire convoy between burning wrecks. What should have been a routine resupply mission had become a battlefield. Over the next 22 hours, Germany threw almost everything at that motionless tank. Anti-tank guns, heavy artillery, combat engineers, even the legendary 88mm gun. Attack after attack failed. An entire Panzer Division was forced to halt, not because of a Soviet counteroffensive, but because 6 men refused to leave a disabled tank. The most astonishing part? This wasn't an ambush. The crew had never been ordered to defend the crossroads. Their tank wasn't even supposed to be there. A day earlier, its engine had suffered the kind of mechanical failure that usually ended a battle before it began. Across the front, other Soviet heavy tanks broke down and were abandoned by their crews. This one wasn't. Instead of retreating, 6 ordinary soldiers made a decision no military handbook had prepared them for. If the tank could no longer move, they would make the enemy stop instead. That single choice disrupted the momentum of Germany's lightning advance during the opening days of Operation Barbarossa. General Erhard Raus would later admit that one disabled tank delayed an entire division at a moment when every hour mattered. Because in June 1941, Germany had more tanks, more aircraft, and more experienced soldiers than almost any army on Earth. But there was one resource it could never replace: time, and for nearly an entire day, 6 men trapped inside a broken machine stole it. So how did a stalled engine become one of the most extraordinary roadblocks of the Second World War? To answer that, we first need to understand why the Germans completely underestimated the machine that made it all possible. To understand how one disabled tank stopped an entire Panzer Division, you first have to understand why the Germans had no idea what they were about to face. By June 1941, the Wehrmacht believed it had perfected modern armored warfare. Poland had fallen in weeks. France had collapsed in just 42 days. Every victory reinforced the same lesson: speed, coordination, and relentless momentum could overwhelm any army before it had time to recover. Then came Operation Barbarossa. Before dawn on June 22, 1941, more than 4 million Axis troops crossed the Soviet border in the largest land invasion in history. 3 massive army groups surged east, expecting another lightning campaign that would end within weeks. For the first 2 days, everything went according to plan. Soviet communications collapsed. Entire units were surrounded. Bridges fell intact into German hands. The advance was so rapid that many German commanders believed victory was already inevitable. But hidden inside the retreating Soviet lines was a weapon German intelligence had badly underestimated: the KV-1 heavy tank. It wasn't fast. At nearly 45 tons, it was slow, difficult to maneuver, and plagued by mechanical failures. Engines overheated, transmissions broke down, and many crews abandoned their vehicles before they ever reached the battlefield. Ironically, the KV-1's greatest enemy was often its own engine. Yet it possessed one extraordinary advantage: its armor. German crews confidently fired their standard 37 and 50mm anti-tank guns, the same weapons that had smashed through Polish, French, and British tanks. The shells hit exactly where they were aimed. Then they bounced off, again and again. Experienced German gunners couldn't believe what they were seeing. For the first time since the war began, they had encountered a tank their standard weapons simply couldn't destroy. But while the Germans struggled to penetrate the KV-1, the Soviets struggled just to keep it running. During desperate counterattacks around Raseiniai, several KV-1s broke down and were abandoned because recovery vehicles couldn't tow them through the marshy terrain. Military doctrine was straightforward. If a disabled tank couldn't be repaired, destroy its sensitive equipment, abandon the vehicle, and retreat. That was the official procedure. It was also the logical one. Most crews followed it. But somewhere along a narrow Lithuanian road, one crew made a different decision. Instead of seeing a broken tank, they saw an unmovable fortress. And what looked like a mechanical failure was about to become the strongest defensive position on the battlefield. Because sometimes the most dangerous tank isn't the one charging forward. It's the one that never leaves. History usually remembers the generals, the men who planned campaigns, the commanders who moved armies across maps. But sometimes history changes because a handful of ordinary soldiers refuse to make the obvious choice. The crew inside this KV-1 were not famous. No celebrated tank ace commanded them. No legendary officer led the mission. In fact, history doesn't even know all of their names. The driver is widely believed to have been P.E. Yershov, but even that remains uncertain. When the battlefield was investigated decades later, only 2 crew members could be identified with confidence. The others remain unknown. Yet their actions would become legendary. Like thousands of Soviet tankers in the summer of 1941, they had been thrown into the chaos of Operation Barbarossa with little warning. Their job was simple: keep their 45-ton machine moving and delay the German advance whenever possible. Then disaster struck. During the fighting on June 23, the KV-1 suffered a mechanical failure. The crew tried to restart the engine. Nothing. They checked for fuel. Nothing. The transmission refused to respond. Their tank was finished. Around them stretched marshland too soft for heavy vehicles to cross. Recovery was impossible, and German forces were closing in fast. Military doctrine offered only one answer: destroy the vehicle. Take your weapons. Escape on foot. Most Soviet crews facing the same situation did exactly that. It was the safest decision, the smartest decision, the expected decision. But these 6 men saw something everyone else overlooked. The narrow road beside them was the only supply route feeding the advancing 6th Panzer Division. If the tank couldn't move, neither could the Germans. Without speeches or dramatic orders, the crew made a choice that would change the battle. They stopped thinking like stranded soldiers. They started thinking like defenders. The broken KV-1 became a fortress. Every shell was counted, every firing angle studied, every round would have to count, because they understood one brutal truth. No reinforcements were coming. No recovery vehicle would rescue them. No retreat was possible. This tank would either become their greatest weapon or their grave. Within hours, the first German convoy would appear around the bend, expecting another routine drive to the front. Instead, it was about to meet 6 ordinary men who had turned a mechanical failure into one of the most effective roadblocks of the Second World War. If you're enjoying these forgotten stories of World War II, subscribe now. We uncover the battles, inventions, and ordinary heroes that history almost erased. As the sun rose over the Lithuanian countryside on June 24, the first German supply convoy rolled toward the crossroads, completely unaware that 6 trapped soldiers had been waiting for them all night. June 24, 1941, just after sunrise, the first German convoy wasn't expecting a fight. Its mission was routine: fuel for the advancing Panzer Division, ammunition for frontline troops, medical supplies and replacement crews pushing east to keep the offensive moving. The invasion had advanced so quickly that many drivers believed the road ahead was already secure. Then, the lead truck rounded a bend. The driver slammed on the brakes. One after another, every vehicle behind him stopped. Blocking the narrow road stood a massive Soviet KV-1. Silent, motionless, its engine dead. From a distance, it looked abandoned. Several German soldiers climbed from their trucks and stared at the giant machine. They had already passed dozens of broken Soviet vehicles during the invasion. This looked like just another one. No one fired. For a few long seconds, nothing happened. Inside the KV-1, 6 exhausted men waited behind thick steel armor they had spent the entire night preparing. Every shell had been counted. Every target had been chosen. There would be no second chance. The convoy crept closer. 20 meters. 15, 10, only when the road was packed with vehicles did the Soviet commander give the order. The KV-1's 76mm gun erupted. The first shell struck the lead fuel truck. It exploded into a wall of fire. Seconds later, another round destroyed the last truck in the convoy. In an instant, the road became a trap. Burning wrecks blocked both directions. Drivers abandoned their vehicles as machine gun fire swept across the convoy. Ammunition cooked off inside the trucks, sending explosions echoing across the countryside. Within minutes, 12 supply vehicles had been destroyed or abandoned. The survivors fled through the smoke carrying an unbelievable report. One Soviet tank had shut down the only supply road feeding the 6th Panzer Division. When the news reached General Erhard Raus, he refused to believe it. His first assumption was that the convoy had stumbled into a larger Soviet counterattack. Reconnaissance patrols searched the surrounding forests. Artillery observers scanned the countryside. Staff officers rushed to identify enemy formations that didn't exist. Every report came back with the same answer. There was no hidden brigade, no defensive line, no ambush. Just one disabled tank still sitting in the middle of the road. What had begun as a mechanical breakdown had become an operational crisis. Fuel deliveries stopped. Ammunition backed up for miles. Frontline units waited for supplies that never arrived. For an army built on speed and momentum, every passing hour became more expensive. Destroying the KV-1 was no longer about clearing a road. It was about restarting Germany's entire advance. The obvious solution seemed simple: bring up anti-tank guns, knock out the tank, move on. But over the next several hours, General Raus would discover something no German commander expected during the opening days of Operation Barbarossa. His standard weapons weren't powerful enough, and every failed attack gave the 6 men inside the KV-1 exactly what they wanted: more time. By mid-morning, General Raus had stopped asking why the road was blocked. Now he faced a far more urgent question: how do you destroy a tank that refuses to die? By mid-morning, General Erhard Raus no longer cared why the road was blocked. He cared about only one question: how do you destroy that tank? The obvious answer was anti-tank guns. German 50mm guns had already destroyed countless Soviet vehicles during the opening days of Operation Barbarossa. There was every reason to believe this battle would end the same way. A battery of anti-tank guns was rushed into position under the cover of nearby trees. The crews took careful aim. The order came. Fire. The first shell slammed into the KV-1. A flash of sparks burst across its armor. Then, nothing. Another round struck. Then another. The steel echoed across the marshland as shell after shell hit its target, but instead of punching through, they ricocheted harmlessly away. The German gunners couldn't believe what they were seeing. They weren't missing. Their shells simply couldn't penetrate the tank's armor. For several tenth seconds, the KV-1 remained perfectly still. Some German soldiers thought the crew had finally been knocked unconscious. Then, the turret slowly rotated toward them. The Soviet crew had deliberately waited. Every German gun had revealed its position. Now, it was their turn. The KV's first shell destroyed one anti-tank gun instantly. A second round smashed into another position. Moments later, a third explosion silenced the remaining guns. Within minutes, the entire battery had been wiped out. The Germans hadn't cleared the road. They had handed the Soviet crew perfect targets. Back at headquarters, frustration turned into urgency. Fuel trucks were piling up behind the front. Ammunition deliveries were delayed. Medical vehicles couldn't reach the wounded. Every passing hour drained the momentum that Blitzkrieg depended on. General Raus needed a new solution. Heavy artillery was brought forward. A field howitzer fired directly at the motionless tank. The shell exploded nearby, throwing mud and debris high into the air. For a moment, the KV disappeared behind a cloud of smoke. When the dust settled, it was still there, scarred, shaken, but still blocking the road. By now, German officers realized they weren't facing reckless soldiers. They were facing disciplined men who fired only when it mattered, conserved ammunition, and forced the Germans to attack on their terms. Finally, Raus ordered his most powerful weapon into action. The legendary 88mm gun. Already feared across Europe, the 88 had destroyed nearly every tank it faced. If anything could end the standoff, this was it. Hidden beneath camouflage, the massive gun was carefully moved toward the crossroads. Its crew raced to deploy before the Soviet tank spotted them. But the men inside the KV had been watching since dawn. Before the 88 could fire a single shot, the KV-1 fired first. An armor-piercing shell struck the gun directly, destroying it before it ever entered the fight. For perhaps the first time during Operation Barbarossa, an entire German division had exhausted nearly every conventional solution against a single enemy vehicle. Yet the road remained closed. The stalled tank still controlled the crossroads. As the afternoon faded into evening, General Raus accepted an uncomfortable truth. Firepower alone wasn't enough. If the tank couldn't be destroyed from a distance, it would have to be destroyed up close. That night, German combat engineers received one of the most dangerous assignments of the campaign. They would crawl through the darkness carrying demolition charges and try to destroy the tank by hand. As darkness settled over the Lithuanian marshes, German engineers began inching toward the silent KV-1. They believed the exhausted crew inside had finally reached their limit. They were about to discover they were wrong. Night settled over the Lithuanian marshes. For the first time in nearly an entire day, the battlefield fell silent. No artillery, no engines, no shouting. Inside the crippled KV-1, 6 exhausted Soviet soldiers waited in darkness. They had fought for almost 22 hours. Their ammunition was running low. Their engine had been dead since the battle began. But they still held the road. Outside, German combat engineers prepared one final gamble. Instead of trying to outgun the tank, they would destroy it by hand. Carrying demolition charges, they crawled through the marsh under cover of darkness. Their mission was simple: reach the tank, place the explosives, end the standoff before sunrise. From German headquarters, the plan seemed certain to succeed. Surely the crew inside had to be exhausted. Surely they couldn't stay alert forever. But once again, the Germans underestimated the men inside. The engineers crept closer, meter by meter, until they were only a few yards from the tank. Then the silence exploded. Machine gun fire erupted from the KV-1. Tracer rounds ripped through the darkness, forcing the engineers to abandon their explosives and dive for cover. The survivors retreated into the marsh. Another carefully planned attack had failed. Another night had been lost. By dawn on June 25, General Erhard Raus reached an unavoidable conclusion. There would be no clever solution. The tank had to be overwhelmed. At first light, German forces launched a coordinated assault. Heavy guns opened fire from the front, while German tanks maneuvered around the crossroads, deliberately forcing the KV's turret to face multiple directions at once. For nearly a day, the Soviet crew had anticipated every attack. This time, they couldn't cover every angle. Hidden 88mm guns finally found their opportunity. The first armor-piercing round struck the KV-1. Then another. Then another. After absorbing countless impacts, the heavy armor finally failed. Inside the fighting compartment, steel fragments tore through the crew. Smoke filled the tank. The gun fell silent. Even then, German soldiers refused to approach. The KV-1 had fooled them too many times. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. Finally, infantry advanced cautiously toward the battered vehicle. Its armor was covered with scars from dozens of hits, yet only a few rounds had managed to penetrate. One soldier climbed onto the hull. Suddenly, the turret shifted slightly. Panic spread instantly. German troops threw themselves to the ground, convinced the crew was still fighting. Only after a grenade was dropped through one of the penetration holes did the hatch finally open. This time, there was no response. Inside lay all 6 Soviet crewmen. None had surrendered. None had tried to escape. For nearly 22 hours, they had held the only supply road feeding the 6th Panzer Division, forcing one of Germany's fastest-moving formations to stop and fight a battle it had never expected. Years later, General Erhard Raus would write with genuine admiration about the determination of the KV-1 crew, acknowledging how 6 ordinary soldiers had disrupted the momentum of an entire division. And perhaps the greatest irony of the battle was this: the Germans spent nearly an entire day trying to destroy a tank that had already broken down before the fighting even began. The battle was finally over. The road reopened. The German advance continued. But what happened after the shooting stopped ensured that the courage of 6 nearly forgotten soldiers would outlive the war itself. By the afternoon of June 25, 1941, the road was finally open. German fuel trucks rolled east once again. Ammunition reached the front. The advance continued. From a military standpoint, the obstacle had been removed. But before the 6th Panzer Division moved on, something remarkable happened. The German soldiers buried the 6 Soviet tank crewmen with full military honors. It was an extraordinary gesture during the opening days of Operation Barbarossa, one of the most brutal campaigns of the Second World War. Respect for the enemy was rare, yet the men who had spent nearly an entire day trying to destroy the KV-1 understood exactly what they had witnessed. These 6 soldiers hadn't delayed the German advance with superior numbers. They hadn't possessed overwhelming firepower. They had simply refused to abandon their position. Even General Erhard Raus later described the crew as men with nerves of steel. Their courage was remembered. Their names almost weren't. For nearly 24 years, the crew rested in an unmarked grave near the battlefield. Then, in 1965, Soviet investigators returned to recover their remains. They found fragments of uniforms, personal belongings, and enough evidence to identify only 2 of the 6 crew members with certainty. P. E. Yershov, V. A. Smirnov. The remaining 4 either could not be identified or remain uncertain in the historical record. Think about that. 6 ordinary soldiers delayed one of Hitler's elite Panzer divisions during the opening days of the largest land invasion in history, yet most of them remain anonymous. And perhaps that's what makes this story unforgettable. Their greatest victory wasn't measured by the trucks they destroyed or the guns they silenced. It was measured in time. Nearly an entire day, during the opening phase of Operation Barbarossa, German strategy depended on relentless momentum. Every delay slowed supply lines, disrupted armored spearheads, and forced commanders to solve problems they had never planned for. One broken KV-1 accomplished exactly that. Then comes the final irony. The KV-1 became famous for its nearly impenetrable armor. It also became notorious for mechanical failures. The very breakdown that should have ended this crew's fight created the position that made them legends. Had the engine never failed, they would have driven on with the rest of their unit. The convoy would have passed. General Raus might never have written about the battle, and history might never have remembered them at all. Instead, a stalled engine, a narrow road, and 6 determined men proved a timeless truth. Wars are not always shaped by the largest armies, the most advanced weapons, or the greatest generals. Sometimes, history changes because ordinary people refuse to leave when every logical reason tells them they should. The engine never started again. It didn't have to, because the moment it failed, it became the most valuable tank on the battlefield. If you enjoyed this story, you'll love the documentary on your screen now. It tells the true story of another forgotten World War II hero whose split-second decision changed the course of an entire battle. Click it now, and if you enjoy uncovering the hidden stories of history, subscribe, because we bring you the incredible World War II stories that history almost forgot.